Welcome to another episode of Beyond Coaching. Very excited about today's episode, joined by a new friend, Jim McNeal of the U.S. Naval Academy. He's a Naval Academy grad, published author, coach, all sorts of stuff. Has a new book that I just got done reading called The Crucibles that we'll talk about. Called Crucibles that we'll talk about at the end. But just a guy that spent his life, I think, struggling, studying leadership and mentoring young leaders, and excited to pick his brain today. So Jim, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So we connected through a friend of mine, a friend of both of ours, I guess, Doc Beeman, whose daughter's at the Naval Academy now. And yeah, he called me one day just singing your praises of how you've been a resource to them. But curious, talk us through just your role and what you're doing at the academy, and then your coaching. Kind of give everybody a background.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a Naval Academy graduate, class of '86. I was a supply corps officer. I played rugby here and was fortunate enough to damage both of my shoulders so severely that I could not get a regular commission in the Navy. And I was able to go in the supply corps, which is the business side of the Navy, which is what I wanted to do anyway. So uh, certainly God's plan for me was exactly what I was hoping it would be. Did 6 years of active duty, then transitioned to the civilian world, had my own business, continued my time in the reserves, as a hobby and ended up, making admiral in the reserves, again, with my own business, allowed me the time to do that stuff, and the other thing it allowed me to do was, to coach, and I have, 3 kids, and I realized very early on that there's nothing worse than watching a kid practice of any sport. It's pure torture. And not only is it boring, I was sitting there thinking, I'm not the greatest coach of all time probably, but I think I can maybe do better or at least as good as these guys. And at least it'll be, not not just mind-numbingly boring. So I just started coaching, maybe not even for the right reasons, but as soon as I did, I just really fell in love with it. And I did soccer and some other things. My daughter's the oldest, so Bobby socks and that sort of thing. And then I got the opportunity to coach my oldest son in flag football. And I've always loved football, and it just became just a natural. And uh, I continued doing it 8 years in Pop Warner. Then I had the opportunity to do it at the high school level. And I got to the high school level, and I was very fortunate to be on a staff that was very, very good. It was the type of environment and the type of coaching staff where there was a lot of positive pressure. And what I mean by that is when you're around really, really good people and really good coaches, there's a lot of pressure to make sure that you are living up to what everybody else is doing. So I was deathly afraid of showing up at a meeting not having watched a ton of film or not having thought about what our game plan is, or go out on the practice field and just dial it in, because it was just such a high performing coaching staff and I was just thrilled to be a part of it. And we had a ton of success, small private Christian school in San Diego with about 300 and something students. And we would regularly beat big public schools that had 2 to 3,000 students. And it was such a wonderful time in my life that, I consider it, and it was funny because I was there 14 years, and the first 7 years, I had 2 sons, that went through, and so at that point, 7 years plus 8, so 15 years in, and my youngest son graduated, and my wife said, "Okay, well, I guess you're not coaching anymore." And I said, "Do you really think I've been doing this for them?"
So you don't understand.
No, no, this is no. In fact, people say, "Hey, it must be so," and I don't know, if you coach your kids, but for those that have, no one ever could tell that my kids were my kids because, I just coached.
Mhm.
And my oldest son especially would always get mad if I ever praised him, because he would say, "Oh, they think you're gonna favor me and you're favoring me." And I'm like, "No, if you do something right, I'm gonna call it out, but if you do something wrong, I'm gonna call it out too." And I would end up watching the film a second time where I just watched them like a dad, because I wouldn't watch them during the game because I was doing the other stuff. And so my wife, kind of parallel, she was a stay-at-home mom, middle school teacher. She was also Naval Academy grad and classmate, decided to get her PhD, which she did, and she got hired by Towson University in Baltimore. And so we moved back here in 20 at the end of, well, beginning of 2018, but we came out house hunting in 2017. And I remember from my time at the academy that we called it 150s then, but sprint football had volunteer coaches. And so and I don't do this very often, very rarely. I played the admiral card. I sent a note to the head coach, who was a Marine major, and said, "Hey, I'd love to get together with you, Admiral McNeal." Of course, I got a yes, sir. Whenever, let me know. Yes, sir. Well, yes, sir. And so we met, and I just started, hey, I just wanted to hear about sprint football. And, we talked for an hour or so. And finally he said, "Oh, hey, would you be interested maybe in volunteering with us?" And I'm kind of thinking, gee, it took you long enough to figure that out. Yes, I would love to. So that's how I got in with the Navy sprint team, and I did that for 7 years. My last 4.5, defensive coordinator and special teams coordinator, so just a ton. Running 2/3 of the team, that's a lot,
Mhm.
uh, and especially with not having, all volunteer slash young grad coaches, so no real professional coaches. So I had to do a lot of it myself. Um, and then I also got involved as a teacher, so I teach, as an adjunct starting in 2000, ethics and moral reasoning for the naval leader, which is a sophomore leadership class. And then, probably the biggest thing I do, and it'd be a good Harvard Business School case study. Kids just started saying, "Hey, do you have any time to meet with me? I'm kinda going through something, or I'd like to pick your brain on this." And this organic volunteer mentoring business that I do, that's what I spend the most of my time doing. So, for example, last semester, it sounds kinda ridiculous, but I had 37 kids that I mentored on a regular basis.
Wow.
And so I essentially come to work, and I meet with kids all day long, and then I teach a little bit, and I do some football, and go home, and I'm having the time of my life, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I've been jotting notes. I'm gonna take us a lot of different directions here. Uh, um, let's start with, because we have a lot of there's kinda at least people that communicate with me, there's 3 segments of our audience on the podcast. We have kind of the college coach or administrator, high school coach administrator, and then the parent. So,
Okay.
talk about the difference from coaching the high school to the college kids, and just compare and contrast those experiences of the type of kid you're working with and developmentally where they were at.
Okay. Oh, that's great. So, yeah, yeah, it's interesting, and I guess last little thing is I stepped down from my position, at Navy Sprint, and went back to high school. So I am coaching high school, this season, so I've kinda, I started at flag. So first year I coached were 5, 6, 7-year-olds, went all the way up. I remember, my 4th year I got into coaching Mighty Might, which was pads. I thought I had made it. They actually have football gear on. And then I went into high school, and that was a whole 'nother level, and then obviously college. But I think the biggest example is the maturity level. Certainly the brains are more highly formed, and the college kids can remember things more. If you go over something, they usually get it right away, whereas the high school kids, you have to kinda drum it into them a little bit more. But the high school kids are really playing, with their friends and for the love of the game, and a lot of them, or most of them, this is all they're good. This is the only, this is the last time they're going to play football in their lives, and there's a real joy to it. And I'm not saying that's not how the sprint team was. The sprint team had that as well, but there's also a lot of other things here, because at the Naval Academy, no one came to the Naval Academy to play sprint football. We don't recruit anybody, and these are all just kids who some played high school, some didn't, and they've got a lot of other stuff going on, our trainer had a really great saying. He said, "Our job is to get them across the stage, meaning graduate, because they get their diploma, they walk across the stage. And so if there's some injuries or, they have some, hey, I love sprint football, but I'm gonna fail out. I mean, we're looking really holistically at the college level of, hey, we got to make sure that we have if we have a sprint player who's not going to be successful as an officer in the Navy or Marine Corps, then that we're missing the boat, and we're missing the whole mission of what this is about. Whereas high school, it's just kind of just pure joy of the game. And I coach at St. Mary's High School in Annapolis, and the kids play so hard. I mean, they're frustrating as 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids are, but, there's a real joy in what they do, and, they've got pretty simple lives, they live with their parents,
Yeah.
they get up, they go to school, they go to practice and repeat. So it's different. I think every level's fun. I think probably if I was an NFL coach, I'd say that's fun too, and probably in its own way, but they're both fun, but they're very, very different.
I think one argument I'd have with you, I've always avoided coaching my kids, just because I partially make my living in athletics and I never want them to feel pressured to play. But I got talked into being the assistant coach on a 7-year-old flag football team this fall. We had our first game Saturday and failed to get a first down. So it was a humbling experience.
Well, what I tell here so here's my coaching philosophy. So when we do well, it's all coaching. When we do bad, lousy players.
Yeah, that's
That's what I
exactly
tell
right.
my kids.
That's what I told my son on the way home. You didn't suck, we'd be better. And then I'll stop talking about if this our best plays were the ones where I draw them up and then they screwed them up. That's where we would actually gain some yards. Oh, man. Well, I wanna learn more, and I've listened to a couple other podcasts you've been part of, the leadership class, and I think in one of the podcasts I listened to, you described the Naval Academy as a leadership laboratory.
Mhm.
So talk about the class you teach, and what does it mean to be a leader? Like, what is that? I think you hear it and it sounds great, but in practicality, what's going on that makes it a laboratory?
All right, let me I'll tell you about the class second, but I've got a really good example of it being a leadership laboratory, especially as it applies to sports. And I hadn't really thought of this, but one of the young ladies I was mentoring, she was a volleyball manager, and we were talking, and with the kids that I mentor, it isn't, every single kid has different things they want to talk about. Some it's school, some it the physical stuff, some it's their sports, some it's relationships, some say, "What are we going leadership?" I mean, they need someone to talk to, and I guess I'm a kind of a sympathetic ear, but so she had some frustrations with what was going on her team, and she had just a really incredible statement. She said, "You know what these coaches around here don't get is that when we look at them as leaders. We look at everybody that we interact with at the Naval Academy as a leader, and we're judging them not about X's and O's or how good they can teach us calculus. How are they leading
Hmm.
us? Because that's what we're supposed to be doing when we get out there." And she's out in the fleet now on a ship and, excuse me, doing great. But I thought, you know what? That is so true. And that's why this is a leadership laboratory. So it doesn't matter the other things that people are doing or the success they have in their particular area. Are you demonstrating good leadership for these midshipmen? And now the fortunate thing, and this is just leadership, general leadership 101, you don't have to learn from a good leader. You learn just as much and sometimes more from a bad leader.
Absolutely.
So, not only are you learning from the good leaders around here, you're learning from the bad leaders. So, and what I tell the midshipmen is no one is gonna hand this to them. No one's they get a diploma, but they don't get a leadership style handed to them also. So their 4 years, it needs to be focused on, "Hey, when I get out there and stand in front of my troops, am I the best possible leader that I can be?"
Mm.
That is got to be their goal and their focus. And yeah, grades and sports and all this, extracurriculars and all these other things. But when the rubber hits the road, the whole reason they have this school and us taxpayers pay for it is so that they can be successful when they get to the fleet.
Let me ask you this. I assume, and the people I know that have gone to the academy, I mean, we're talking the high achiever, the high achiever. Uh,
Yep.
the kids like I watch in my context that become leaders too, they really struggle with the failure piece. They haven't failed a lot in
Mhm.
their life. And as I get older, I the most effective leaders are the ones that admit the failure, learn from it, and move on. Talk about how you mentor them, work with them on the handling the failure piece. Because in your book, you talk about the experience and the whole first year is designed for them to fail, it seems like, so in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you and you're right. It's an interesting paradigm because you say, "Hey, we're going to take very, very high achieving high school students, the best of the best, and put them in a situation where we're gonna cause them to fail." And for and I think probably the most common thing now, luckily for me, this wasn't me. I wasn't, didn't have a 4.0 in high school and wasn't top of my class and barely made the top 10%. But there's a lot of people that, hey, I was the team captain of this and I was president of this and I was salutatorian of this. And then I get here, well, so is everyone else. And then I get something thrown at me and I'm not able to handle it very well and I do fail. So how do I rally past that? And the way that I first of all, you have to give the kids permission to fail. Okay, you have to that's if someone goes through this entire experience, this crucible,
Mhm,
free plug for the book, this entire crucible of the Naval Academy and doesn't fail, then they haven't done it correctly because this is designed for you to fail. And failing here is not gonna get someone killed. Failing here is not gonna get a piece of equipment damaged. Failing here is not gonna lose a battle that may affect something, for our national security. Failing here is a way to learn how to fail. Why did I fail? How do I get better so I don't fail when it really matters,
mhm,
right? Hey, if you, and you're if you bust on a coverage in practice, I want you to bust. If you don't understand the coverage, let's figure it out in practice. I don't want that to happen in the championship game.
mhm,
And that's exactly so it's okay to fail during practice. I just want you to fail in the game. And that's really what this is. This is practice. We want to make sure they're ready to go for the game. So, but it's a really tough thing for high achievers to um to really kind of internalize that that's okay. In fact, we had uh, an officer that coached with us several years ago, a sprint, who had never failed. He was just an incredible, you know, guy with respect to, academics and physical stuff and just but then got into coaching and was not successful and just didn't know how to handle it. And I've kind of felt bad for him because either the Naval Academy just didn't challenge you enough or you didn't challenge yourself enough to get into a situation where you learned how to fail because he didn't have a great experience coaching because he never learned how to fail. Hey, when you fail, what does that mean? Well, you got to get internal, self-assess, right? Self-reflect. I need to take responsibility for it, right? Hey, how come we got shut out in a championship game? Oh, kids didn't execute. That's your job. Your job as a coach is to have the kids execute. That is the job. So, that could have been a great life lesson for him, but it wasn't. And so, I wanna make sure that the kids that I mentor don't get to be in that scenario. I want them to understand, "Hey, it's okay." But again, it starts with, "It's okay to fail.
mhm,
You're supposed to fail." Well, Silicon Valley, fail, but what do they say in Silicon Valley? Fail quickly,
mhm,
right? Fail fast. Fail fast. It's okay to fail, but fail fast and move on.
yeah. What
And that needs to happen here.
go a level deeper for me on that because I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I was that high achieving kid that didn't really fail till college, and my initial instinct was to blame an external factor, or it wasn't my fault, it's this, that, or whatever. How do you help kids walk through that piece and look inward as opposed to blaming an external factor?
Okay, great. So let me maybe answer it this way. I'm in a mentoring group, uh, adult mentoring group called the Severn Leadership Group, and I'm paired up with different people that want mentoring and leadership, and it's been a really great experience for me. That's one of the things about mentoring. So I really plug for mentoring. You know, oh, I don't have time for that, and I'm too busy for this, and I very selfishly mentor because I get more out of it typically than the mentee does. So that's why I do it. I mean, part of it, because I get better.
Yeah.
When I'm around meeting all these midshipmen, these kids who are 1,000 times better than I was when I were their age, they make me better,
Mhm.
right? But so I we with this mentoring group, we do some one-on-one mentoring, then we have some group sessions, and I was asked, I don't know, a year or so ago, "Hey, we're gonna have a group session, and I want you to do a small group, and I want and can you talk about a time you failed?" And I said, "Sure." And I thought about it, and I wanna make sure that I message this correctly. So when I sat down with the group, I said, "From an external standpoint, I've never failed." And they were kinda like, "Ugh." I said, "If you look at my life, I've been fairly successful in almost, every area of my life." And so most people wouldn't say, "Hey, I don't say I failed based on external measures of me. Where I have failed is by my own internal standard." And it really brought home to me, so a kid that I mentored with this mentorship group went on a deployment, left the academy, went on a deployment for about 8 months on an aircraft carrier. He came back, he missed our entire season. We won the championship game that year, 2022, went 8-0, beat Army twice, great season, and we sat down for breakfast after he came back, and he said, "Man, you had a great season." I said, "We were bad. Defensively, it's one of the worst defensive teams I've ever had." And he said, "How can that be? You went 8-0, you beat Army twice." I said, "Because we were based on my internal standard, my we failed that season. I failed in so many areas. I did a terrible coaching job that year of the kids that I had. I did a terrible job of coaching. We were incredibly lucky to win both of those games, both those games against Army." And that's where it kinda hit me in talking to him. If you constantly looking at external things as far as failure or success, your kind of whims, you're kind of blowing in the wind a little bit, as opposed to what's my North Star?
Mhm.
What's my measure of success? So I want to, if I want to do this, I don't care if people say I've success or failed. What do I think? So that's how I look at it. And I talk to the kids. John Wooden's definition of success is being basically the best person that you could be, you're capable of being. Right? And if we get and the academy does a great job of judging these kids and racking and stacking them, and this person's in order of merit ahead of this person gets to pick this instead of this person. But it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, are you being the very, very best version of yourself that you can be? And you can't be that unless you fail,
Mhm.
because when you fail, you get better. It's like a weld, right? If something fails and you weld it, it's stronger than it was originally.
Yeah. We use a saying around here at friends where I'm at of commit to the process of winning, because so much of it is pretty arbitrary. And the story I always tell young
Right.
coaches of a couple of years ago, we had a really good women's basketball team in August, and by December, 4 starters were hurt or ineligible. They got 7th in a 14-team conference, and I'd say that was a pretty successful year. They played their best basketball team to the
Mhm.
and if it's just an external factor, they woulda they would have taken down the tent and gone home, and it's such a challenge though of how you build that to where you're measuring yourself against yourself or the program against what the ceiling is as opposed to, just trying to win or look good. That's a cultivation of
Well,
character.
and you have to learn. Yeah, and I was just gonna add, sorry to interrupt, but you have to learn to really love the process,
Mm,
and that's another thing when I coached at Christian high school in San Diego. What I really learned from those guys is it's not just about Friday night. It's not just about the gear. You have to learn to love the process. Where you bond, the fun thing about coaching, for one of the fun things for me is the competition and all that's great, but the relationships you have with the kids. That's the fun part. I just heard a kid that graduated in 2016 just reached out to me. So what was that, 9 years ago, and he's in his 20s and was wanting to talk to me about something, and I hadn't talked to him since he graduated high school.
Oh, cool.
I mean, that's what this stuff's that's but you build those relationships through the process, it's not on the Friday nights, it's when you're out there on a practice, and you've done this, I know, a million times like I have. You're out there, it's hot, it's cold, it's raining, fill in the blank, whatever. No one wants to be out there, and no, there's nobody in the stands, there's no dads watching, there's no fans watching,
Mhm.
it's just grinding through a practice, trying to get 1% better that day. And that's how you build the relationship, with these kids.
Mhm.
And learning to love that process, and really, but that's why football is such a great life lesson, because that's what life is, right? It I don't wanna sound like a get off my lawn type of guy, but, all the wedding stuff and the social media, and I mean, it's great, right? We all love weddings, yeah, yeah. That's not that's not being married.
Yeah.
Being married is right? Being married is showing up every single day and being, with someone every single day. My wife had a little medical didn't feel well last night, so I was involved in that all night with her, and that's what it's about. It has nothing to do with it, but it's the process.
That's
The process is, you know?
Yeah, give me your reaction to this, because it's something I've started struggling with a lot in my role here of we wanna win. We wanna do all we can to build people up and win as many games as we can. But the most powerful experiences I see kids have, or the transferable skills to later on in life, is when they have a bad year and learning to deal with that. And,
Mhm.
and I but on the flip side, I've been an AD for about a decade now, coached a decade before that. But even 10 years into being an AD, I'll drive home pissed off when we lose, you know? But I also know intellectually, I watch it and like, man, if they go through the hard stuff and learn to work through it together and have those hard conversations, that's where a lot of the true value comes from. And I don't know, I just feel a lot of conflict within that.
Well, and I think you hit on it earlier when, if you look at yeah, I mean, it's about winning and losing, or there wouldn't be a
Yep.
scoreboard, right? But if you look at, like I said, when I looked at, even though we went 8-0, and I looked at, hey, what were some things that we did that I could have done differently? If I had come back and said, hey, that was just a great season, and I did everything I could, that's different than saying, hey, I could have been a lot better. Or the flip side is, like you said, with your team that finished 7 out of 14 teams in the league, hey, that was the best we could possibly do.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you're it's kinda like, if you ever are not pissed off driving back after a loss, then maybe probably should get out of that job. I don't want my AD to say, "Hey, guys, it's okay," you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, but, hey, what could we have done better? And when we say "we," it's collective "we."
Mhm.
Right? The coach said, "Hey, remember I said I needed this and you didn't give it to me," or "We needed this," or "Remember I wanted to bring that kid in to play point guard," right? And we couldn't, those are the types, but a lot of people don't wanna have those types of conversations, but
Mhm.
that's how you get better, and that's part of the failure piece. So it's not okay to fail, but it's okay to fail, but not if you're just gonna say, "Hey, but the kids are all everything's all good with the kids and everything," that's also not an answer.
Yeah. Let's go, one other route on this. So I got into coaching in 2007. You would have started when I was kind of in my later years of high school. I'm fascinated with looking at the different generations and how we coach, how we correct them. Um, I'm curious your take on how that's changed over time of how you can coach kids, and have you adjusted at all on how you communicate with them, especially in terms of correction?
Yeah, I've been fortunate that I've because of my Navy experience and being part of organizations and being in leadership positions, especially secondary relationships, you have to kind of fill in the blanks. So I'm pretty good at if I'm on a group where everybody's a screamer, I'm the put the arm around and hug person. And then the flip side is if it's a bunch of huggers, I can be the screamer. So so part of I think the answer to your question is it has you has to be what is your staff holistically, what how does that all fit? How does all those pieces fit together,
Mhm.
right? So that's certainly one. Um I and maybe I'm in the minority. I don't think the kids have changed that much. I think kids are especially high school kids are still high school kids.
Mhm.
And I've always and again, so it's when you get to be old like me and you reflect on things and you say, you know, "Wow, that was really good what I did. I didn't have any idea why I was doing it, and I got really lucky that it turned out to be a really good thing to do." But let me give you an example. So when I started in high school, I was supposed to be the JV defensive coordinator. And it was gonna be my son and I knew some of his friends that were playing. That was a good transition from Pop Warner to at a small Christian school as JV defensive coordinator. So I show up for gear issue, and the guy that hired me, JV head coach, says, "Oh, by the way, head coach changing, and we're gonna single staff it." And I don't know if you know what that is. Basically, there's one coaching staff. So if you're the D line coach, you're the JV D line coach, and you're the varsity D line coach.
Okay.
And so when varsity offense is practicing, JV offense, varsity defense practice, JV offense, and you flip it. And so he said, "Okay, so you're JV defensive coordinator," and that year I only had one assistant who came sorta sometimes, so I learned a lot that season, but he said, "You're also the varsity DB coach." So I went from coaching 12-year-olds to walking out to a DB indie session with 18-year-old, and I was petrified. You talk about fake it till you make it. I mean, these guys are now almost 40, right? These kids are almost 40 years old. But I'm like, I mean, I just couldn't I'm like, I can't go up there and say, "Okay, guys, let's do this." And so I just said, "I'm gonna get to know these kids first. I wanna kinda know what they are." I was new to the school. And so I said, "Okay, guys, take off your helmets, get a knee, and we're gonna have a chalk talk." And I could see the OC and the head coach getting chippy. They didn't like that. But they let me do it. And we took, 5, 10 minutes of a 20-minute indie period on that first day of just talking, getting to know them. And we kind of started doing a regular basis to where, and we started to have some conversations. Hey, what about this? What about that? And it was so effective. And by doing that and showing that I cared about them, they knew I didn't know anything. They didn't know I had no clue what I was doing. They knew that for sure. But they knew that I cared about them and they were going to give me that grace and cut me that slack. And so the next year when I knew a little bit more, I kept doing it and I've always done it. And I did it this year at St. Mary's. The very first day of practice with the varsity and the JV running backs, which is my position group, we I said, "Pop your helmets and let's get on a knee and let's do a chalk talk." And we went around and you know, the you can be a great coach, you can be a great anything, but if the kids or the people you're leading don't think you care about them, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
They're not gonna listen to you. So I think, again, maybe an unconventional opinion. I think the kids are the same. Now, I would say the one thing that has changed obviously is social media. Uh, that's just I mean, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
podcast, right? I mean, that stuff's I don't social media just kinda was getting started when my kids were kinda getting into college, and I don't envy parents now that have high school kids with all the social media stuff, and yeah, it's not good,
No.
but it it is what it is, it's how our society is, so, but the kids themselves, they want and here's the other thing is, so the school we went to, Christian school, private school, not expensive, and I could tell it became very quickly very easy for me to determine which kids had engaged parents, especially dads.
We're on the same page. I was
Because
about to ask you if you thought this had changed.
Nope, because when you'd spend some time with a kid and man, they would just you could just tell it was like, they're just thirsty. And great parents. Dad very successful doing but not spending any time and getting having that role model, that adult role model. Just spend some time with them and, "Hey, hey, what's going on in school?" And just that stuff like that. And it's kinda sad because, well, I've gotta pay work hard to pay for everything, and I get that. But though the kids still want that, and the kids still need that.
Yeah, I actually my last couple years of coaching, and this is a broad generalization, so I'm not meaning to insult anybody, but I was tracking the kids I had on my in my program from single parent homes, and especially dads that weren't around, because
Mhm.
um, there was just, those kids would come in wanting a lot from me, and not in a bad way.
Yeah.
I almost got it down to a science where I knew I could support this percentage of kids, um,
Mhm.
just because if they had a present adult male figure in their life, they were gonna soak that up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you, the kids like that, they're tricky though, because a lot of those kids, there's a lot of anger
Yes.
and a lot of swag, a lot of anger, and you can have some battles. And I've realized that, hey, you can't back down. And as soon as but if you can burst through that facade a little bit, then you can really start to build a relationship. But I think some coaches say, "Oh, this kid's just a little too much." Well, it's a defense mechanism. It's because so many things have happened in their life, right?
Mhm.
And when I coached, and I got now again, I was fortunate because where I coached Pop Warner was in a area with a lot of apartments and single parents where we would sign kids up in June and in July. They wouldn't show up for practice, and we'd call number disconnected, evicted from their apartment, stuff like that. So we I those kids were a challenge, but you're right. If those are the kids that you could really, really have an effect on. And not that you can't have an effect on the kids that have great parents, but I mean, as a leader, we spend most of our time with the smaller percentage of
Yeah.
kids, and that's where we really make our money. Because the kids that come from great families, yeah, they're wonderful, and I love them too, but they don't need me as much as this other kid needs me, right?
Yeah. What I'm stealing this from one of our coaches here at Friends University, but he would say those kids especially, they don't have a lot of people in their lives that mean what they say and follow through. So
Mhm.
that's where you stand your ground and go, "No, I told you this, and this is what
Right.
it is." And calmly standing your ground then when they push back is one of the keys to it all.
Yep. Yep. And you gotta really kinda make sure you understand, hey, it's gonna be a little painful. There's gonna be some pouting. There's gonna be some drama. You gotta, our old OC, his one of his favorite sayings is, you've been in those games like that where, things are going wrong or things aren't going great, and he always called it just gotta weather the storm.
Yep.
And I just thought that was so perfect. And we just had on our last game on Friday night, we had some little bit of some meltdowns on the sidelines, and I just said, "Hey guys, we just gotta weather the storm here. We're gonna be fine."
Yep.
We're down 6-0 at half, 6-0 going in the fourth quarter, and it should have been 28-0. And in fact, it was only 6-0. Was like, "Okay, we got this thing."
Mhm.
They had their knock, it's kinda like Rocky, right? He didn't knock us out. We're still standing, so, we're gonna be totally fine, but you gotta weather that storm.
Yeah, and what's
And the kids without that solid foundation, those are the ones that tend to lose it.
yeah. And what's going on in
Those
my
are the
head
ones you get.
yeah, what's going on in my head right now too, I think the role of the coach in these scenarios is they gotta be the adult in the room, and where they lose credibility or they react emotionally, you gotta be the adult in the room.
Yeah. And it's so funny because it's funny you mentioned that because so there's a kid that I've kinda taken under my wing a little bit, 25-year-old who's helping us, and he went to the high school, and he's, just graduated the Naval Academy. He's getting ready to go out in a little while and go do his thing. But he's helping me, and he's very emotional and, just, all this stuff. And I got mad at a kid. I hate special teams when, you have the punt team out there, where's so and so, and then they're out running late, or you have to throw a kid out there who's never been out there. I just hate that. And so when this kid didn't do that, I kinda got in his face a little bit, and he was like, "Wow, that's the first time I've ever seen you mad." And I said, "Well, when I was your age, I was a raging maniac." So, to your point, absolutely, you gotta be the adult in the room, and the thing is, if you're not that, it just gives everybody permission to just be nuts,
Yep.
and that's why I don't yell at refs. I don't yell at refs, because all that does is give everybody an opportunity to have an excuse for why you weren't successful.
Mhm.
Now, I've seen and my saying is, and I there's refs out there, I apologize, I'm not any of you I'm talking to, I'm talking to everybody else, but lousy refs make lousy calls. So what I tell the kids is don't put us in a situation that makes a lousy ref have an opportunity to make a lousy call. So don't do it where it could be, "Yeah, I wasn't holding." "Yeah, but it kinda looked like you were."
Mhm.
So don't let them make that call. Don't do it the right way. And as much as there's been bad calls, I've coached, I think, pushing 400 games in 30 years. That's all, because when I coached in 10 of the 14 years in high school, my first stint, we did 2 games, I did JV then varsity back to back, 4 and 7 o'clock. So 25 games a year pretty much with that. So I've coached a lot. I've won a lot, lost a lot, lost a few, won a lot. Um, but I've never lost a game because of a bad call by a ref,
Mhm.
ever. Because for every bad call by a ref, and I mean, I could name 10 off the top of my head right now, 3 or 4 times as many bad plays where we didn't do what we're supposed to do, we didn't do this, we didn't do this, we didn't do this. For every bad ref's call, there's 5 plays that weren't made by us. Where if we had just made those plays, the bad ref call wouldn't have mattered.
Yep. Totally agree. Um,
So what I do with the guy on the sideline is I cuddle up to him, I learn his name, cuddle up to him, and then I'll say, "Hey, Joe, could you watch 72, man? He seems to me like he's holding every play." You know how many times I'll get a holding call by pointing that out? How many holding calls do you get when, "I can't believe you missed that holding call." You'll never get that call, ever, 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 ever. But they're human beings too.
yep. Yep, no doubt. Alright, I wanna go 2 more spots. One, I wanna finish up
Okay,
talking about your book, but I wanna learn a little
okay.
bit more, Doc, my friend told me about the leadership class you teach.
Yes.
Tell us a little
Yeah,
bit about that course specifically.
okay. So, real quick, to the leadership curriculum, it's a leadership laboratory, it's a leadership school, so there's a leadership course every year. Your freshman year, it's, basically learning about yourself.
Mhm.
That's because you can't lead others unless you know yourself. Your junior year is more leading others. Your senior year is about some of the law and the junior officer stuff. But the sophomore year, the class that I teach is called Ethical and Moral Reasoning for the Naval Leader. And it's an interesting kind of hybrid course. On Mondays, which we just had today, we have what I call a real teacher, like my wife, a PhD, an academic who goes over the academic curriculum, and then Wednesday and Friday, I say, "Okay, we talked about this, but this is how it's relevant to you as a junior officer."
'Kay.
So it's generally referred to as ethics. Who do you have for ethics? But I tell them the first day, "Look, this is a leadership class, and I'm not an academic. And that's what adjuncts typically are, know their field, and that's what I am. And so we're gonna talk at this stuff. If you have a really in-depth academic question, Dr. Skirker, our philosopher, he can explain all that stuff to you. But I'm gonna tell you why it's important to you as a junior officer, and that's how we're gonna go through it. But that's, talking about mentoring, making you better. Uh, this teaching this class, we didn't have that when I was here,
Mhm.
and it was mandated by Congress in the mid '90s after a big cheating scandal. And but it's made me so much better as a person by teaching this class and really understanding myself. And hey, when I did this, I'm just rationalizing this, and I mean, it's made me better, and it's been a real blessing to me to be able to help these kids, and the reason we do it sophomore year, and there's a thing called 2 for 7. So when they show up for their junior year, they have to sign a contract that says so they've already done 2 years and they're gonna do another 7, so 2 at the academy and 5 in the Navy or Marine Corps, and basically they get in their white uniform and they sign a contract that says, "If you leave, then you owe us money back for your education. If you leave at the end of your sophomore year, you walk away, without any obligation." And so it's a big deal to them. And the reason we want to do this class this semester is we talk about things like, hey, you're on a ship and you're in charge of sending Tomahawk missile. You're the Tomahawk fire control officer. So you're in charge of sending Tomahawk missiles and you're sending to a military target. And then you find out a half an hour before you're going to launch that there's a school right next to it and the school's in session. And there's going to be collateral damage if you blow up this weapons factory with the school next to it. And you got to push the button. Can you do that? And we talk about the ethics that talk about the morals that we talk through all that stuff. And we have some kids who just say, I don't know if I can do that. And they say, then you can't be here.
Mhm.
It's because it's not, that's not, you have to do what's right for you, but you can't be here if that's and so you need to really think about, hey, do you want to stay? And we and it's we have a few handful of kids that will leave because it's actually way easier to stay than leave.
Mhm.
I have a lot of respect for the kids who leave when they realize it's not for them because no matter what, when they go back home, everybody's like, "Oh, academy wasn't for you, huh? Yeah, uh-huh.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't for you, right?" Even though that might be the decision they're making, it's way easier just to stay and just not have to deal with that stuff at home, you know?
Yeah. So one thing been fascinated about in my career, I spent 4 years as a dean of students or VP of student life and spent a lot of time studying, like, student developmental theory of college age kids. And that sophomore to junior year is interesting because it goes from a lot of relational type stuff to bigger picture stuff. Could
Mhm.
kids really dive into those conversations and the deeper nuance of it all? I'm curious, just that seems like it'd be a challenging thing teaching wise to get them to dive deep.
Yeah, it is, and the other thing is it still is a class, and so you're not gonna have 100% of the people dive in. My wife's, you know, when she said when she was here, the leadership classes she took, she said, "I wish I could have spent more time doing those classes, but I had other fish to fry." And so the example I'd like to use is, hey, I can get a B in ethics and get a D in physics, which is preferable to an A in ethics and an F in physics.
Mhm.
And so, I think one of the things that the Naval Academy teaches all these midshipmen, certainly me, is time management. What's the alligator closest to the boat? What has to be done today? How are you going to prioritize your time? Because we all only have 24 hours.
Mhm.
And so how are we going to use this time? And you have some kids who just will dive in and they'll say, this is the greatest class I've had, and still have a great relationship with them. Other kids, I just know they're just like, "Look, I'm an engineer. I'm trying to be a robotics and controls engineer, so yeah, this stuff's good. I can probably do the minimum and get a B. If I learn a couple things, that's great, but I got other stuff to do." And I'm not gonna try and change their mind or whatever, that's not really my job. So, hey, here's me, here's what here's what I'm about, and I'm gonna try to do the very best I can for you, and if you wanna embrace it, great, and if you don't, that's your call because it's your life.
Yeah. The alligator closest to the boat. I've never heard that.
You ever heard that?
Never heard that.
Oh, yeah. And I when I it's funny because when I really get and, I'm really semi-retired, so I only do what I wanna do, but sometimes I just overextend myself and it really becomes very, very cutthroat of, "Okay, I have an hour. What absolutely has to happen
Mhm.
between now 2 o'clock.
Mhm.
And I'll look at it and they'll just say, okay, this and this and this. And it's just kind of crystallizes that. And that's the skill you learn here because part of the failing thing is, hey, we're going to put you in situations where you don't have enough time. It's a physics issue. I remember we would go to when plebe summer, we would go out and we do a workout in the morning. And back then the door in Bancroft Hall wasn't air conditioned. So you would take a shower, then you'd be drenched, 5 seconds later because it was just hot in there. But they would say, okay, they would dismiss us. I had 2 roommates. All right, guys all have to go up, take a shower, get your uniform, get out of your PT gear, get your uniform on. And I need you back here in 8 minutes. Okay, that's impossible. That's not gonna happen. And they knew that, but that was part of the whole thing. Hey, here, how are you gonna react to that stress?
Mhm.
Hey, I did my best. I did everything I could. So for me, one of the great lessons I learned from the academy was time management.
Mhm.
Because and any successful I've never seen a successful person who wasn't a good time manager.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't think I've ever looked at it in that way. That makes some sense. Well, let's transition. Um,
Okay.
I'm not big enough time where this is a paid advertisement, but I loved your book. Actually, one of our he recommended some of our coaches, and one's already reading through it too.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic.
but yeah, I got some questions, but kinda give the overview of the book, and I think it just came out this past summer. But yeah.
Yeah,
Go for
it came out June 10th.
it. Okay.
It's, the 3rd book the 3rd book I've done with a collaborator. The first one was The Herndon Climb, which is about the, experience at the end of the plebe year of climbing an obelisk, like a little Washington monument, that signifies the end of the plebe year. I did that with a friend of mine we met in 7th grade. And then the last 2 books, including Crucibles, were with the Naval Academy grad, also Supply Corps officer, Eric Smith. And kind of the genesis of this, I was doing an authors panel for uh, the Herndon Climb, and they said, "Hey, you can pick your moderator." And so I picked a friend of mine, and he said, "Okay, here's the questions I'm going to ask you." And so we went through this panel, and I was just nailing stuff, right? I already had, I had to answer the test, and everybody's, I'm just brilliant, all this different stuff. And then he says, "Okay, so what's your next book?" And I'm like, I didn't answer for that one. And so I just kind of blurted out, "Well, I just think maybe a history of plebe at the academy, that might be fun." And so that was it. And then I kind of just tucked that away. And then we are looking for our next project. I thought, we could frame it around our plebe summer and plebe year, but let's look at some organizations that do have different types of crucibles because the Naval Academy was absolutely a crucible. I was just on a podcast recently with Grant Vermeer called Academy Insider. We talked about this. Is the academy still a crucible, even though it's changed? The kids have changed and it's kind of changed its methods. And absolutely yes. So we just started, hey, let's look at different types of organizations that have crucibles events and let's just see, compare and contrast and just see, are there some commonalities or things we can learn about it and what we enjoy about the books. And we would love to, be a New York Times bestseller and sell millions of copies and all that stuff. But we enjoy our relationship, the time we get to spend together doing it. And we learn a lot from doing all of this research. So with all the different organizations we did, I do, so the way we kind of divided up, kind of a director producer relationship. So uh, Eric does most of the writing and I do everything else. And so a lot of the, I do all the interviews and, um, but we work on everything, crafting everything together. And we hope, I'm glad to hear you liked it because we think there's some really interesting stories of some interesting groups and what you can learn from those
Yeah.
groups.
So define crucible for everybody. Just make sure we're all on the same page.
So Crucible is something that a group or organization puts their potential members through to to make them worthy of that group. So you could say with say a football team, it's back they don't do 2 days anymore, but back in the old days, 2-a-days, right? Summer camp, um, getting through that. So this it's kind of a barrier to entry,
Mhm.
right? So why is it, why is it a big deal for I interviewed Major General Bolden for the chapter on astronauts. Well, what I mean, if you and I were astronauts and so was everybody else, then it wouldn't be a big deal to be an astronaut. But what is the crucible for that? And it was just and it was a fascinating interview with General Bolden because again, and I stuff that I learned, you had the Mercury 7, right, which were the initial group of astronauts, and he said it's really changed on the types of people they're looking for because and I hadn't it makes total sense. I had never thought of this. They didn't know what space was gonna do to people.
Mhm.
So they said, "Hey, look, we need the most physically perfect specimens of people that we can find because we have no idea what's gonna happen when human beings get into space." Well, now they figured out, well, it's actually there's some stuff, weightlessness, but we can send women up there. We can send scientists up there. We can send really smart people who may not be the best physical specimen of all time, but because we know what space does to people. So they kinda changed their crucible a little bit. But the whole point of it was, hey, if we're gonna go do this thing and send somebody into space in this in a space capsule, we're gonna put them through this crucible. And I think even like Apollo, you saw what happened, everybody's familiar with Apollo 13. You know, those 3 guys, and Admiral or Captain, Jim Lovell just passed away a week or
Saw
2
that.
ago.
Yep.
Uh, but those 3 guys survived because of the crucible that they had been put through by NASA.
Mhm.
Me, you, and, our best friend would not have survived up there doing the stuff that they did. And you look at it, and that's why we didn't want it just be military. We wanted to be that's why we tried to make it as kinda diverse and as, different groups as possible.
Well, it was fascinating because you start out the first part of your story, the Naval Academy. Then you go all these crucibles from NASA to I found can't remember what they're called, the Hawaiian group where they threw them in the water with with the sharks to, the mafia. I mean, everything in
Yeah.
between, and some of it is crucibles can be I mean, they can be in any type of organization. Um, that I just yeah, reading about the mafia and the made men, that's stuff I didn't know. It was fascinating to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we and again, we tried to pull, different lessons out
Mhm.
from each of these crucibles. For the mafia one, it was while we don't endorse organized crime and killing people and all this other stuff. There's this disclaimer there.
It was
It's about
I
loyalty,
would say it
right?
was one of the more
It's about loyalty.
powerful examples that kinda cemented the concept for me.
Okay,
Yeah,
good, good,
and, um, and they're doing a bunch of terrible things, but it was just an
right.
interesting read. Um, 2 things that
And
came
the I'm sorry, I was gonna say the Gurkhas for me um, was a really interesting chapter just because I had always had heard the Gurkhas. I had seen the Gurkhas in the Middle East when I was deployed there, but I didn't realize, Nepal and how, if someone becomes a Gurkha, I mean, that sets their
yeah,
family up,
forever, yeah.
for life. And you think about, I mean, we take a lot for granted here in the US. Yeah, we have poor people. Yes, we have poverty. But if you've ever traveled internationally, you don't know poverty till you've been in some of these countries that I've been to.
Yeah.
The poorest person here would be a king in some countries.
Mhm.
And when basically in Nepal, every single able bodied young man tries out for this thing because it's the ticket for I mean,
Yeah,
that's a lot of pressure.
yeah. I wanna talk about 2 things. 1, looking through the lens of coaching and just our current state, it was really easy to see on teams how crucibles can turn into hazing or turn into the bad side of things. Um, I don't even know how to frame the question. I'm just curious your thoughts on that and how to manage them in a healthy way to where they're an add-on to the organization that builds pride and, yeah, give me your response to that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely, and I love
Yeah.
traditions. I absolutely love traditions, and I hate when traditions get, you know, compromised or removed or whatever, but I think there's that line where, hey, are we doing this? Are we doing this to bring this person in? Or are we doing this to push this person out?
Mhm.
And when it becomes like some of these bands have these kind of crazy hazing rituals and things like that. And I may get skewered for this. I think there's positive hazing and there's negative hazing. Everybody says hazing, is the H word. We don't use that word. If you're putting somebody through something and you can tie it to a positive result, that's not hazing
Mhm.
in my view. If you can't tie it to a positive result for the organization, then it is hazing. That's the dividing line I make.
Mhm.
So, for example, one of the things and I think we talked about in the book, one of the things the plebes have to do, what Doc Beeman's daughter's doing, she did it about an hour and a half ago, is you have to do a chow call where you have to memorize a bunch of information. You have to stand out in front of the outside an upper classes room, and you have to memorize this information, scream it at the top of your lungs, and do it very fast, and then repeat it 5 minutes later. And now some people would probably watch that and see that and say, "Well, that's just," and then if they stumble, then it's kinda like sharks with blood in the water. Here come the upper class, and, "Hey, don't you know this stuff?" And there might be some yelling, all that stuff. And you're like, "Wow, look at that hazing going on." And that to an outsider, I could see where people would say that. However, what about is there anything about it memorize information that you have to remember to be able to repeat back? Is there anything we could tie that to the Navy and Marine Corps? Well, yes, there is. When you're in an airplane, when you're flying a Marine or Marine or Navy aircraft, and you have the manuals up there with you, you have a bunch of information. However, if you're in an F-18 and an engine goes out, you don't have time to Google that. You don't have time to look it up in the manual. There's a certain number of steps that you have to memorize, repeat out loud, and do in the exact order, or you're going to probably die. That's stressful. So if you're at the Naval Academy and you can't do a chow call without someone in your face because you can't remember the menu for noon meal, how are you gonna do that as an F-18 pilot? So, that's not hazing. Now, if you're doing something to degrade someone or demean somebody and you say, how is this, make you better?" And you can't answer that question, then that's hazing and you shouldn't
Yeah.
do that. But I don't think putting people under stress is hazing.
Yeah. Well, I thought you guys, this is kind of my last comment/question, brought it together masterfully at the end, when you're talking about the concept of learning organizations and how like a crucible needs to be designed. I'm looking at it right now. You guys are right. It should be designed and managed to meet each of the 5 elements of a learning organization: testing personal mastery, challenging assumptions, building culture, expanding expertise, and representing a purposeful strategic process. And I think you just covered all 5 of those in your example right there.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, and I'm this is, I covered this a little bit on the another podcast I did. We've got to be really careful at the Naval Academy of not wanting to be unique because it costs a lot of I mean, when these kids sign this 2 for 7, I don't know where they get this number from because 'cause they're not on scholarship. It's a made up number in my opinion, but it's 240,000 or something. So if you were to leave the day before graduation because you didn't wanna stay, you'd have to pay 240,000. So that's a lot of money that
Mhm.
times 4,400, so whatever that is. Um, but we have to be really careful that the taxpayers are getting the bang for their buck. And if that you can go ROTC at UCLA for a quarter of that. So we have to be 3 or 4 times better. The officers that we produce at the Naval Academy have to be 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever times better than what OCS, Officer Candidate School or OTC can produce, or there is no reason for having the
Hmm.
Naval Academy. So I think as we try to be a little kinder, gentler, we've got to be really mindful of the fact of hey, but are we still producing the, because only 20% of the officers are from the Naval Academy. It's only 20%,
I know
the
that.
entire officer. So we need to make sure that those 20% are as best as they can possibly be so they're worth that money. If not, then just send everybody to OCS and ROTC and, we don't need the school.
Yeah. Well, I highly recommend the book, and, for you non-readers out there, I'd say you buy it, read the first and last chapter, then the summary at the end, and there was so much that I think any coach or athletic leader could take away from. So, really good stuff. Any final thoughts?
Yep. It's also an audiobook.
Oh, there you go. Are you reading it on the audiobook? Are you the
No, 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 our publisher hired a pro to do it, so we thought that was better, but, um, no, I mean, I think that, coaching is such a great thing to do. I know that when people find out I'm a football coach and I've spent my time doing this, I think they definitely look at me like I'm a little bit weird that I would be spending my time doing this, but the joy and the impact that you have on these kids. So I just want to say thank you to all those coaches out there, whatever sport it is, because and there's some sort of you know thing out there that says that a kid will spend more time with their coach often than any other adult,
Yep.
and we make coaches make such a huge impact. And the other thing is, and this happens all the time, you'll say something and someone will say, you said to me 6 years ago, you said blah, blah, blah. And I really took that to heart. And that kind of, was a good course correction for me. And my answer to that is always A, I don't remember that. But B, it does sound like something I'd say.
Sometimes those comments scare me too, some things they might remember. Well, I almost let you off the hook there, but I'm not going to. We always wrap up with, kind of what we call lightning round, where I'm gonna ask you 4 or
Okay.
5 questions. You have no longer than 30 seconds to answer any of 'em.
Ooh,
We'll finish here.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
Question 1, what is one book that has greatly influenced your life?
Season of Life by Jeffrey Marks. Highly recommended for any coach. Basically, um, a year in the life of a high school team in Baltimore, and it's all about exactly what we've talked about. Of hey, it isn't about the season. Is what type of husbands, fathers, mothers are we doing with these
Yeah.
kids? How are we building them up for success in life?
Well, you just named one of my favorite books, so well done.
Oh, okay.
Number 2, how has a failure or a parent failure set you up for later success? Or said differently, do you have a favorite failure?
Well, like I said, I think I talked about it where, my mentee said, "Hey, that was a great season," and I said, "Really, it wasn't." And it helped me that next season of coaching because I kept talking, a lot of defensive coaches, "Hey, under 60 yards rushing, t no more than this, no more than this," and I'd say, "Look, what's our standard? Don't worry about all the other stuff. What is our standard? So don't worry. So we're going to go to our standard." So that was kind of a real game changer for me from a coaching perspective of what is our standard. That's what we're shooting for, not a bunch of external judging.
Right on. How do you define success in your work?
Well, work. If it's work, it's probably not success. At this stage of my life, if I consider it work, it's probably not. It's probably I'm not probably doing it right. Um, And if I'm not, this stage of my life, if I'm not enjoying myself, then I'm probably doing it wrong.
Well said. Last one. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
Um, Probably getting up early, and I won't and I would say get up early. My daughter-in-law calls it getting up in the middle of the night, but often I'll get up between 3 or 4 AM, and it allows me to operate without any external influences. I can do whatever I want at 3 in the morning. No one is gonna bug me at all. And now my kids, when I grade things or I'm putting out film, grading on film, and they'll always just get amazed when they see what time it goes out. But, you that's one thing that you can control. And, when people say, "Oh, I couldn't get up that early." Well, what time do you go to bed? "Oh, I go to bed at midnight." Well, what are you doing from 9 to 12? "Oh, I'm doing this and what," So people can kinda do what they want, but it's been a game changer for me to get up earlier than I used to get up because that just gives me just kind of a solid foundation for the day.
I like it. Well, that was great. We went ranged enough across different categories. We might split this into 2 episodes for everybody, but, really good stuff. So thanks for joining me. Any final thoughts?
No, I was really happy that Doc, made this introduction, and, I appreciate what you're doing with this because I know that this takes up your time as well, and I think, what podcasts and people trying to get information out to other people just makes us all better, and it just kinda shows to me that we're all in this thing, it's a collective fight. And there's a lot of forces out there that are trying to tear us down. And it's this type of stuff that kind of builds us back up. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this. And I appreciate you doing this and providing me this opportunity. So thanks for having me.
No, happy to do it and really enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thank you.